The first thing Sarah noticed when she stepped into her brother's sprawling Connecticut home wasn't the scent of pine and roasting turkey, nor the warm glow of the Edison bulbs strung along the vaulted ceiling. It was the silence that fell, thick and sudden, the moment she closed the front door behind her. It was the kind of silence that felt like a held breath, a pause button hit on the festive chatter that had, seconds before, filtered in from the great room. She shifted the heavy ceramic dish in her arms, the one containing her grandmother's green bean casserole, the only thing, her mother had insisted for 15 years, that Sarah was trusted to bring. The cream of mushroom soup and fried onion topping had sloshed precariously during the 2-hour drive from the city, and a dull ache had settled deep in her lower back. "Hello?" she called out, her voice unnaturally bright in the hush. Her sister-in-law, Chloe, appeared from the archway that led to the kitchen, wiping her hands on a linen towel embroidered with a cartoon turkey. "Sarah, you made it." Her smile was a tight, perfunctory line. "We were about to send out a search party. Traffic must have been a nightmare." "The usual holiday mess," Sarah said, offering a smile she didn't feel. She hefted the casserole dish slightly. "Where should I put this?" "Oh, just on the kitchen island, I suppose. We're a bit cramped for space." Chloe's eyes flickered over Sarah's simple wool dress before she turned, expecting to be followed. Sarah did, her sensible heels sinking into the plush, cream-colored carpet. The house was a testament to Mark's success in private equity and Chloe's talent for minimalist, magazine-ready decor. It was beautiful, sterile, and always made Sarah feel like a bull in a china shop, too loud, too present, taking up too much air. The great room opened up before her, a scene of curated familial bliss. Her brother Mark held court by the fireplace, a glass of single malt scotch in his hand, laughing at something his golf buddy, David, had said. Sarah's mother, Eleanor, was perched on the edge of a white sofa, sipping Chardonnay and looking wistfully at the perfectly set dining table, which glittered with crystal and polished silver. And there, in the center of it all, was the problem. Every chair at the 12-seater table was occupied. Not just by people. On one of the heavy, upholstered dining chairs, nestled on a cashmere throw, sat Chloe's Pomeranian, Gizmo. A small, silver bowl of what looked like mashed potatoes and gravy sat on the floor beside him. Sarah's heart did a slow, painful sink in her chest. She counted again. Her parents, Mark and Chloe, their 2 teenagers, David and his wife, Aunt Carol, Uncle Jim, and Gizmo. 12. She was the 13th. The cold started in her fingertips, a numbness that began to spread up her arms. She set the casserole dish down on the crowded kitchen island with a soft thud that no one seemed to hear. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice quieter now. Eleanor turned, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Sarah, darling. There you are. We've already started with appetizers, I'm afraid you missed the baked brie." "Where should I sit?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Eleanor's gaze flitted to the table, a faint crease appearing between her brows. "Oh, dear. It seems we're one short. It got so crowded this year with David and Susan joining us." She waved a dismissive hand, her gold bangles clinking softly. "I'm sure we can find a stool from the basement office. Or you could just pull up a chair from the breakfast nook." Sarah stood frozen. A stool. From the basement. Like a child. Or an afterthought. She looked at Gizmo, who yawned, his pink tongue lolling out, utterly secure in his place at the family table. She thought of the $500 she'd Venmo'd Chloe just last week for her share of the holiday groceries. She thought of the Netflix, Hulu, and HBO Max subscriptions that were all on her credit card because it's just easier that way, Sarah, with your points and all. She thought of the years, the decades, of being the reliable one, the one without a real family of her own, and therefore the one whose presence and contributions could be so easily assumed. Mark caught her eye from across the room. He didn't smile. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, "What did you expect?" Then he turned back to his conversation. That was the moment the last thread snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break. It was a silent, internal severance, clean and final. The chill that had started in her fingers now settled in her chest, a core of solid ice. Without a word, Sarah turned. She picked up the still warm ceramic dish from the island. She didn't look at her mother, or her brother, or the dog in her chair. She walked back through the silent, beautifully decorated house, opened the front door, and stepped out into the crisp November evening. The call came as she was merging onto the freeway, the casserole dish sitting like a lead weight on the passenger seat. It was her mother. "Sarah, what on earth? You just left. That was incredibly rude." Sarah could hear the clatter of cutlery and laughter in the background. "Mark says you're being oversensitive. It was just a chair, for heaven's sake." Sarah didn't reply. She simply ended the call, turned off her phone, and drove on into the darkening night, the ghost of her family's laughter still echoing in her ears, and a plan beginning to form in the new, quiet space where her heart used to be. The silence in her own apartment was a physical presence, thick and absolute. It was a stark contrast to the noisy void she had left at her brother's house. Sarah didn't turn on the main lights. Instead, she flicked the switch for a single, soft-lit floor lamp, casting long shadows across her minimalist living room. She placed the heavy casserole dish on the coffee table, the final, unneeded monument to a tradition that had just crumbled to dust. Her phone, now powered back on, buzzed on the kitchen counter like an angry hornet. She didn't need to look to know the symphony of notifications, missed calls from her mother, texts from Chloe laced with performative concern, and likely a blistering message from Mark about her lack of decorum. The word oversensitive seemed to hang in the air, a familiar, poisonous label they'd applied to her since childhood whenever her needs inconveniently diverged from their own. She walked to the window, looking down at the glittering grid of New York City. Down there, millions of lives were being lived, contracts signed, love declared, betrayals enacted. And up here, in her 700-square-foot sanctuary, a different kind of transaction was about to be concluded. Not with anger, not with tears, but with the cold, precise logic of a spreadsheet. For years, she had been the family's silent partner, their utility player. The one with a good job in finance which, in their translation, meant deep pockets and no real responsibilities. They'd never seen the 80-hour weeks, the stress-induced migraines, the constant pressure to perform. They only saw the results, the generous Christmas gifts, the bailouts, the seamless web of subscriptions and services that made their lives comfortable. The nice Sarah, the one who could be counted on no matter how little they offered back, was done. That woman had been left standing in the doorway of Mark's mansion, holding a green bean casserole and her own shattered dignity. She poured herself a generous measure of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. Then she opened her laptop. The glow illuminated her face, a mask of calm determination. She started with a blank document, titling it simply, Divestment. This was the low-hanging fruit, the things they would notice immediately but would only cause mild irritation. She opened a new browser tab. Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max. She navigated to each account, to the Manage Profile section. She didn't just log them out. She changed the passwords, one by one, to a complex, 20-character string of numbers, letters, and symbols that her computer generated and saved. Then she cancelled the subscriptions entirely. A small, petty part of her hoped her mother was in the middle of her beloved British baking show. The Amazon Prime household. She removed Chloe's account. No more free 2-day shipping for her sister-in-law's impulsive online shopping sprees. The New York Times digital subscription. Her father loved the crossword. Well, he could buy a paper. It took less than 10 minutes. The first financial bleed had been staunched. She took a sip of bourbon. It burned a clean, clarifying path down her throat. This was where it would start to hurt. This was the infrastructure of their entitlement. The joint family debit card. For 3 years, she had auto-deposited $400 every month into a shared checking account. It was meant for family groceries and incidentals. In reality, it funded Mark's artisanal cheeses and Chloe's organic flour deliveries, with the occasional text from her mother asking if she could use it for a little treat at the spa. Sarah opened her banking app, navigated to the scheduled transfers, and cancelled it with 2 taps. The next payment, due in 5 days, would never arrive. The Costco membership. This was a masterpiece of their audacity. She paid for the executive membership, and they all used the secondary card. She could almost picture the scene: Mark, his cart piled high with enough provisions to survive a nuclear winter, flashing her card at the checkout. She logged onto the Costco website. Cancel membership. A confirmation email popped into her inbox instantly. She smiled, a thin, humorless stretch of her lips. They wouldn't know until their next shopping trip, when the card would be unceremoniously declined. She leaned back, the ice in her glass clinking. This was just the beginning. The real leverage, the true seat at the table they had never acknowledged, was still to come. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Chloe. Chloe, 10:47 p.m. Sarah, are you okay? Mom is really upset. We were all worried. You just vanished. It was just a misunderstanding about the seating. You know how chaotic it gets. Sarah read the message twice. A misunderstanding. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of the profound insult. Just a dismissal, wrapped in the language of concern. She didn't reply. Let them sit in their confusion. Let the first flickers of unease take root. The next morning, the barrage began. It started with her mother. Mom, 8:02 a.m. Sarah, call me. The Netflix isn't working. It says my password is invalid. Then, Mark. Mark, 9:15 a.m. Did you do something with the Costco account? Chloe just tried to use it and it was declined. This is ridiculous. Fix it. She silenced her phone and went for a long run along the Hudson River. The cold air cleared her head. When she returned, showered and dressed in clean, comfortable clothes, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The power had shifted. She was no longer reacting, she was acting. This was the big one. 3 years ago, when their father had a health scare, Sarah had set up a high-yield savings account. She'd framed it as a family safety net. For vet bills, unexpected car repairs, a leaky roof, the kind of things that could derail a budget. She had seeded it with $5,000 and contributed $200 a month ever since. She had, foolishly, given them all the login details, urging them to contribute if they could. Not a single one of them ever had. But they had certainly learned to withdraw. She logged in. The balance was a healthy $8,240. She scanned the transaction history. $300 for Gizmo's teeth cleaning. $500 for a new tire on Mark's Audi. $150 when the dishwasher broke. All taken, never a word of thanks, just the silent expectation that the fund would be there. With a few clicks, she initiated a transfer of the entire balance to her primary savings account. She left the account open, the login details still valid. She wanted them to see the zero. She wanted them to log in and stare into the empty well they had taken for granted. The fallout was swift and glorious. Her phone rang an hour later. It was Chloe. Sarah let it go to voicemail. Sarah, hi. Weird question. I was just trying to log into the emergency fund to pay the landscaper, and it's showing a zero balance? Did it get hacked? Can you check on it? Call me back. There was a tremor in her voice, a note of genuine panic. Sarah felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Later that evening, a text from her mother, the tone shifting from confused to accusatory. Mom, 7:30 p.m. Sarah, Chloe told me about the emergency fund. What is going on? That money is for the family. This isn't like you. Are you having trouble at work? Are you in some kind of financial trouble? And then, the piece de resistance, from Mark, the following morning. Mark, 8:55 a.m. I just heard. What the hell, Sarah? Are you having another one of your episodes? You can't just steal family money because your feelings got hurt over a chair. You need to transfer it back immediately. This is insane. Episodes. The word was a nuclear bomb in their family lexicon. It was the catch-all term they used to pathologize her perfectly valid emotions. Her grief after a bad breakup was an episode. Her frustration at being constantly taken advantage of was an episode. Now, her justified financial retribution was an episode. They were trying to reframe her sanity, to paint her as unstable, because a stable person would never challenge their comfortable world order. This was no longer just about money. This was a war for her own identity. She was considering her next move when her phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected number. It was Liam, her boyfriend of 8 months. Liam, 11:20 a.m. Hey. You've been quiet. Everything okay? My mom's in the city for a surprise lunch. Can you meet us at Balthazar at 1? A cold dread trickled down her spine. She liked Liam. More than liked him. He was stable, kind, and had felt like a potential escape from the gravitational pull of her family. She typed out a reply. Sarah, 11:22 a.m. Sure, see you then. She arrived at the bustling brasserie 5 minutes early. Liam and his elegant mother, Evelyn, were already seated. The moment she approached the table, she knew something was wrong. Liam's smile was tight, his posture stiff. He didn't stand to greet her with his usual kiss. Sarah, good to see you, Evelyn said, her tone polite but distant. The lunch was a special kind of torture. Liam was withdrawn, answering questions in monosyllables, his eyes avoiding hers. Evelyn carried most of the conversation, asking Sarah polite but probing questions about her work, her family. It felt less like a friendly chat and more like an interrogation. As they were waiting for the check, Liam finally looked at her. Your brother called me last night. The air left Sarah's lungs. Mark? Why? He said he was worried about you. That you were under a lot of stress, that you'd stop taking your medication. Liam looked genuinely pained. He said Thanksgiving was a manifestation. He called it a cycling episode. He said this has happened before, that you pull away and then do drastic things. Sarah felt the world tilt. They hadn't just called her unstable to her face. They had gone behind her back to the one good thing in her life outside of them and planted a seed of doubt. They were trying to isolate her, to make Liam their ally in gaslighting her. Liam, she said, her voice dangerously calm. I am not bipolar. I have never been on medication for a mental health condition. My brother is lying to you. Evelyn looked intensely uncomfortable. These things. They can be so difficult to talk about, dear. Because there's nothing to talk about, Sarah said, her eyes locked on Liam's. He's lying because I cut off their free streaming services and a shared grocery fund after they gave the family dog my seat at Thanksgiving. That's the drastic thing I did. Liam's expression was a mess of conflict. He made it sound so convincing. He said you'd deny it, that you'd spin it. That I'd spin it? The betrayal was so complete, so venomous, it was almost magnificent. She stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. He's not worried, Liam. He's punishing me. And you're helping him. She didn't wait for a response. She walked out of the restaurant, the hum of conversation fading behind her, replaced by a roaring in her ears. This changed everything. They had crossed a line from financial retaliation to personal sabotage. They weren't just trying to get their privileges back, they were trying to destroy her. She went straight home, her mind racing, the cold clarity from the night of Thanksgiving returning with a vengeance. She opened her laptop again. The divestment file was still open. She scrolled past the completed phases. There was one final asset. The big one. The one they had all, conveniently, forgotten truly belonged to her. The lake house. When their grandfather passed away, he left the rustic, beloved family lake house in the Adirondacks to all the grandchildren. Mark, Chloe, who had weaseled her way into the will through relentless sucking up, and Sarah. It had become a money pit. The roof leaked, the plumbing was ancient, the taxes were a constant burden. 2 years ago, they had been facing a $15,000 special assessment for a new septic system. Mark and Chloe had whined and complained but offered no solutions. So, Sarah had bought them out. She had drawn up a simple contract, paid each of them a fair market value for their share, and assumed full ownership and all the liabilities. They had signed the papers with palpable relief, happy to be rid of the headache. She had spent the last 2 years and a significant portion of her savings quietly restoring it, turning it back into the sanctuary it was meant to be. It was her escape, her secret project. And as far as they were concerned, it was just Sarah's problem. Now, it would become theirs. She opened a new email. She addressed it to Mark, Chloe, and her parents. The subject line was, Notice of Revocation of Access. The body of the email was brutally concise. Effective immediately, your access to the property at 112 Lakeview Drive, Blue Mountain Lake, is hereby revoked. The locks have been changed, and the security code deactivated. Any attempt to access the property will be considered trespassing and will be dealt with accordingly. This decision is a direct result of your ongoing campaign of disrespect, financial exploitation, and, most recently, your attempts to slander me to my personal contacts by fabricating a mental health crisis. Do not contact me again unless it is through a lawyer. Sarah. She attached a scanned copy of the property deed, her name bold and solitary under owner, and the bill of sale where they had signed away their rights. Then, she hit send. The response was instantaneous. Her phone began to ring, one call after another, a cacophony of outrage and panic. She didn't answer. She listened to the voicemails as they piled up. Her mother, sobbing, Sarah, how could you? The lake house. Your grandfather would be rolling in his grave. You're tearing this family apart. Mark, screaming, you vindictive bitch. You can't do this. We have memories there. I'm calling my lawyer. Chloe, shrill and panicked, we're supposed to go up there for New Year's. We've already paid for the caterer. You're ruining everything. She deleted them one by one. With each deletion, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. They were finally feeling a fraction of the displacement she had felt. They were the ones without a seat at the table now. She walked back to the window. The city lights twinkled, indifferent to her small, personal war. The main part of the battle was over. She had deployed all her weapons. She had reclaimed her money, her property, and was fighting for her sanity. The final part, the aftermath, was yet to come. But for the first time in her life, Sarah was no longer the accommodating daughter, the reliable sister. She was the general who had set her own terms of engagement. And she was winning. The silence that followed the sending of the email was the most profound of Sarah's life. It wasn't an empty silence, but a dense, charged void, like the air before a lightning strike. She had thrown a grenade into the heart of her family's carefully constructed reality, and now she was waiting for the shrapnel to settle. It didn't take long. The phone calls were the initial blast wave. When she stopped answering, the digital siege began. The family group chat, usually a graveyard of forwarded memes and bland holiday plans, exploded into a firestorm of accusation. It was a tapestry of their personalities, woven in pure panic. Mark, this is illegal and you know it. I'm having my attorney look over the buyout papers. You coerced us. You took advantage of Mom and Dad's grief. We will see you in court. Chloe, Sarah. My friends are flying in from Aspen for New Year's. I have non-refundable deposits. This isn't about you and your drama, this is about real people with real plans. You are so unbelievably selfish. Mom, Sarah, please. I am begging you. Pick up the phone. Let's talk about this like a family. Your father is beside himself. The lake house is his last connection to his father. How can you be so cruel? She read each message, her face a mask of impassive stone. They were so predictable. Mark with his empty legal threats, Chloe with her performative social calamity, and her mother, weaponizing guilt and familial duty. There was no apology. No introspection. No, we are sorry we told your boyfriend you were mentally ill. It was all about their inconvenience, their pain, their disrupted plans. The most telling message came from her father, a man of few words who usually hid behind her mother's volleys. Dad, your grandfather would be ashamed of you. That one stung. It was meant to. But instead of crumbling, Sarah felt the cold core inside her harden into diamond. They were using a dead man's hypothetical disappointment as a cudgel. They had nothing else. She didn't reply to a single message. Her silence was her fortress, and it was driving them insane. The next front opened with Liam. He started texting, his tone shifting from confused to conciliatory. Liam, 8:02 p.m. Sarah, please. We need to talk. I overreacted. What your brother said. It just threw me. Liam, 9:15 p.m. My mom feels awful. She said she came on too strong. Liam, 10:30 p.m. I'm outside your building. Can I just come up for 5 minutes? She walked to her window and looked down. Sure enough, his familiar car was idling at the curb. A part of her, the old Sarah, ached to let him in, to seek comfort, to explain. But the new Sarah knew that his doubt had been the fertile ground in which her family's lies had taken root. He had chosen, for even a moment, to believe them over her. That breach of trust was a canyon she wasn't sure she could cross. She didn't answer the door. She watched his car eventually pull away, a tiny speck of dissolving history in the night. The following morning, she executed the next phase of her Cold War. She knew their financial pressure points. The lake house was a sentimental and social blow, but it was time to tighten the screws on their day-to-day existence. She logged into the utility portals for the lake house, the electricity, the water, the internet. She canceled everything, effective immediately. She called the local security company she'd hired and put the property on a high-alert monitoring system. If anyone so much as stepped on the porch, she and the local sheriff would be notified. Then, she turned her attention to the last, most insidious strand of their entanglement, the narrative. She opened a notes app. She began to list, with the dispassionate eye of an auditor, every instance of exploitation she could recall. The $5,000 she'd lent Mark for a sure-thing investment that never materialized. The $300 a month family grocery fund for 3 years. The streaming services. The Costco membership. The emergency fund withdrawals for Gizmo's vet bills and Chloe's new tires. She attached screenshots of Venmo transfers, bank statements with her contributions highlighted, the cancelled checks for the lake house buyout. She compiled it all into a single, damning PDF. She didn't write a long, emotional letter. She simply titled it, A History of Giving and Taking. She saved it. It was her insurance policy. The climax of their retaliation came 2 days later. It was a Thursday morning. Her phone buzzed with a notification from LinkedIn. Congratulations on your work anniversary. It cheerfully stated. It was a reminder that she had been at her firm for 8 years. It was also the day of the quarterly senior partners meeting, where promotion paths were often discussed. As she was getting ready, her work phone rang. It was Martin, the senior managing partner, a man whose voice usually carried a tone of avuncular approval. Today, it was clipped and cold. Sarah, can you come to my office? Now, please. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air ran through her. Of course, Martin. Is everything all right? Just come to my office. The walk to the corner office on the 40th floor felt like a march to the gallows. Martin was seated behind his massive oak desk, his expression grim. He didn't ask her to sit. I received a very disturbing call this morning, he began, steepling his fingers. From a man claiming to be your brother. Sarah's blood ran cold. They had actually done it. They had gone for her career. He was deeply concerned, Martin continued, choosing his words with surgical care. He said you were experiencing a severe, unmanaged psychiatric episode. That you were making erratic, financially ruinous decisions for your family, and he feared for the stability of your work. He mentioned something about clearing out family accounts and illegally seizing property. He strongly suggested that the firm might want to review your access to sensitive client portfolios until you got the help you needed. The room swam for a second. This was beyond sabotage. This was scorched earth. They were trying to get her fired. They were trying to destroy the very foundation of the independence they so resented. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the ice in her chest preventing her from collapsing. "Martin," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "My brother, Mark, is lying to you." "That's a very serious accusation, Sarah." "So is falsely telling my employer I'm a mentally unstable liability." She met his gaze squarely. "This is a retaliatory smear campaign. I recently cut off my family's long-standing, and largely unreciprocated, financial support after a profound act of disrespect. The seized property is a lake house I legally bought from them 2 years ago. The cleared-out accounts were funded exclusively by me. This is their response." Martin's eyes narrowed. He was a man who dealt in facts, figures, and contracts. He hated emotional drama, but he respected a well-defended position. "That's quite a story," he said, skepticism dripping from his words. "It's not a story. It's a case," Sarah replied. She opened her briefcase and pulled out 2 copies of the PDF she had compiled that morning. She slid one across the desk to him. "This is a summarized financial history. You'll see the regular outgoing transfers to a shared account, the canceled checks for the property, and a timeline of events. The erratic behavior began when I stopped the flow of money. This is a calculated attempt to damage my professional reputation because I am no longer serving as their private bank." Martin put on his reading glasses and skimmed the document. She watched his face change as he flipped through the pages. He saw the numbers, the patterns, the cold, hard evidence of systematic exploitation. He saw the deed to the lake house. He was a man who understood deeds. He looked up at her, the skepticism replaced by a grim, professional understanding. "I see. My personal life is my own, Martin. But my professional integrity is not. If my brother calls again, I would appreciate it if you referred him to my lawyer." She placed a business card from a high-powered family law attorney she had retained the day before on top of the document. Martin leaned back in his chair, the tension dissipating. He almost smiled. A preemptive strike. Smart. He tapped the document. "This is quite thorough. Unfortunate, but thorough." He nodded, a decision made. "All right, Sarah. Consider the matter closed on this end. But for God's sake, get your family in check. We can't have this kind of drama spilling into the office." "It won't happen again," Sarah said, and she knew it was a promise she could keep. Walking out of his office, she didn't feel relief. She felt a white-hot, purifying rage. They had tried to take her job. They had tried to make her unemployable. This was no longer a family dispute, it was a fight for survival. She went home early, the adrenaline still coursing through her. She had held back her ultimate weapon, the one she had hoped never to use. But they had left her no choice. She went to her safe deposit box that evening. There, nestled beside her passport and her grandmother's jewelry, was a single, sealed envelope. On the front, in her grandfather's shaky, final handwriting, was her name. "For Sarah. To be opened only when you truly need to remember who you are." She had never opened it. She hadn't needed to. Now, she did. She broke the seal. Inside wasn't a letter filled with sentimental prose. It was a short, powerful missive, written in the clear, uncompromising language of a man who had seen his own children's nature. "My dearest Sarah. If you are reading this, they have finally gone too far. I always knew they would. You are the strongest of them all, but you have your mother's heart, you feel you must carry them. You must not. I left the lake house to all of you as a test. I knew Mark would see a liability, Chloe a social prop, and your parents a burden. I knew only you would see its soul. I knew only you would fight for it. The official will is filed with my attorney, Jenkins. The clause is clear. The property passes in its entirety to the grandchild who, after a period of 5 years, maintains and assumes full financial responsibility for it. The others were bought out. You passed the test. It is yours, free and clear of their claims. They know this. They have always known. They preyed on your goodness, hoping you'd forget. Don't. Be the lioness I know you to be. It is not cruelty to protect your den. It is nature. With all my love. Granddad. Sarah sat on the floor of her apartment, the letter in her lap, and finally, she cried. Not tears of sadness, but of vindication. He had seen it all. He had known. He had given her not just a property, but permission to fight, to be the lioness. The next day, she went nuclear. She scanned the letter. She attached it to an email, along with the PDF she had shown Martin and a screenshot of Mark's call log to her office, which her assistant had discreetly provided. She addressed it to Mark, Chloe, Mom, Dad, and, for good measure, Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim. The subject line was, the truth. The body was even shorter than the last. Attached you will find 1. Grandfather's letter, explaining the terms of the inheritance you have all willfully ignored. 2. A financial summary of my subsidies to your lives. 3. Evidence of Mark's attempt to sabotage my career with false allegations. This is the last communication you will receive from me. Any further contact, from any of you, will be considered harassment and will be met with a restraining order and, where applicable, a lawsuit for defamation. The lioness is protecting her den. Stay away. She hit send. The silence that followed this time was eternal. There were no calls. No texts. The family group chat was dead. An hour later, a single email arrived in her personal inbox. It was from her father. Sarah. I am sorry. Dad. 2 lines. Too little, decades too late. She deleted it. The final piece of the resolution came that evening. Liam was standing at her door again. This time, he wasn't texting. He just stood there, looking haggard. She opened the door. She didn't speak. I went to see your brother, he said, his voice raw. She raised an eyebrow. I told him that if he ever contacted me, my family, or my place of work again with lies about you, I would sue him for defamation so hard he'd have to sell his precious mansion to pay the legal fees. He swallowed. I showed him the picture you sent me of your grandfather's letter. He had no words. For once, that smug bastard had no words. Sarah said nothing. I was wrong, Liam said, his eyes pleading but not demanding. I was so wrong. I should have believed you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I see you. I see the lioness. He didn't ask to come in. He simply turned and walked away, giving her the one thing her family never had, space and the power of her own choice. Sarah closed the door. The war was over. The battlefield was scarred and silent. She was alone, but for the first time, the aloneness felt like peace. She had not just won, she had reclaimed the territory of her own soul. The story of the forgotten seat at Thanksgiving was closed. A new story, hers and hers alone, was just beginning. Peace, Sarah discovered, was not a loud, celebratory state. It was a quiet, gradual thawing. The first week after the final email was a study in silence. Her phone, once a relentless conduit of familial demands, lay dormant. The absence of its buzzing was a physical sensation, a phantom limb of anxiety that slowly faded into a genuine calm. She didn't do anything drastic. She didn't change her number or move to another city. That would have been a reaction, a flight. And she was done reacting. Instead, she settled into the rhythm of her own life, a rhythm she had nearly forgotten. She went to work, where Martin now treated her with a new, grudging respect. She went to the gym. She cooked meals for one, experimenting with recipes her family would have turned their noses up at. She left the green bean casserole dish, still unwashed, on a high shelf in the kitchen, a relic, not a monument. The first true test of her new equilibrium came on a cold Saturday morning. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother. Not a text, but a call. Sarah watched it ring, her heart a steady, unaccelerated drum in her chest. She felt no urge to answer, no spike of anxiety, no flicker of guilt. She simply observed the event, as if it were a weather pattern happening on another continent. The call went to voicemail. She didn't listen to it. The spell was broken, their words no longer held power over her. A few days later, a formal-looking envelope arrived in the mail. It was from a law firm, but not the one she had retained. Her breath hitched for a second, a final, dying echo of the old fear. She opened it calmly. It was a sternly worded letter from Mark and Chloe's lawyer, demanding she cease and desist from her defamatory communications and reinstate access to the lake house, citing verbal family agreements and promissory estoppel. It was a bluff, a Hail Mary pass from a team that had already lost the game. She forwarded the entire packet, the lawyer's letter, her grandfather's letter, the deed, the bill of sale, to her own attorney with a single instruction: handle this. She knew it would cost her, but the price was a bargain compared to the lifetime of financial and emotional drain she had just escaped. It was the final, formal severance of the umbilical cord. The weeks bled into a month. Winter began to loosen its grip on the city, and the first tentative hints of spring appeared. One evening, while cleaning out her email inbox, she found the automated confirmation of her mother's $12,000 wire transfer, still sitting unclaimed in the digital ether. She stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't an apology, it was a bribe. A final, desperate attempt to balance a ledger that could never be balanced with money. She clicked refund transfer. The money, and the twisted offer it represented, went back to where it came from. The act felt more final than any lawyer's letter. It was her declaration that some things were not for sale. It was around this time that Liam began his patient, persistent campaign. He didn't bombard her. He was just present. A text about an article he thought she'd find interesting. A funny photo of a dog wearing boots in the rain. An invitation to a gallery opening, with a clear "no pressure, just if you're free." He was respecting the space she had fought so hard to create, while gently signaling that he wanted to be in it, on her terms. After 2 weeks of this, she replied. The gallery sounds interesting. Meet you there at 7? It was awkward at first. The ghost of his doubt hung between them. But as they walked through the exhibits, talking about art, about work, about everything and nothing, the tension slowly eased. He didn't mention her family. He didn't offer empty apologies. He just showed up, as the man she had initially fallen for. Later, over a glass of wine, he finally broached it. I know I can't undo what I did, he said, his gaze steady. And I know trust isn't a switch you can flip back on. I just want you to know I'm here. And I'm listening. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. It was a bridge being built, plank by careful plank, over the canyon of betrayal. For the first time, it felt like a relationship, not a rescue mission. The true culmination of her new life came on a bright, crisp weekend in early April. On a whim, she decided to drive up to the lake house. She hadn't been there since the war. The key turned smoothly in the new lock. The air inside was cold and still, but it was her stillness. She moved through the rooms, running a hand over the restored fireplace mantel, looking out at the lake, which was just beginning to shed its skin of ice. This was no longer a headache or a problem. It was a sanctuary. Her sanctuary. She built a fire, the crackling logs the only sound breaking the profound quiet. As she sat on the rug, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames dance, the last of the cold inside her finally melted away. The anger, the hurt, the righteous indignation, it had all served its purpose. It had been the fuel for her escape. But now, she no longer needed the fuel. She had reached her destination. She wasn't happy, not in the simplistic, cinematic way. Happiness was too fleeting an emotion to define this state. This was something deeper, more profound: contentment. A sense of being whole, undivided, and utterly, peacefully, herself. She thought about her family. She didn't miss them. She missed the idea of them, the phantom family she had spent a lifetime trying to will into existence. The real ones, Mark, Chloe, her parents, were like characters from a book she had finally finished reading. The story was over. She had closed the cover. A few days after returning from the lake, she was cleaning out her closet and found a small, forgotten box of old photos. There was one of her, aged maybe 7, sitting on her grandfather's lap on the porch of the lake house. He was pointing at something out of frame, and she was laughing, her head thrown back in pure, unguarded joy. She hadn't remembered that moment. She took the photo and placed it in a simple frame on her bookshelf, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a testament to what was always there, buried under layers of duty and expectation, her own, unassailable self. The final message from her old life came not as a drama, but as a whisper. Her cousin Jake, the black sheep, texted her. Heard your mom and dad are looking at condos in Florida. Guess the mansion wasn't so affordable without the family ATM. Thought you'd get a kick out of that. Sarah smiled. It was a small, closed-lipped smile. She felt no schadenfreude, no victory. Just a distant, clinical acknowledgement of cause and effect. They were facing the consequences of their choices, just as she had faced hers. She typed back a simple reply. Thanks for letting me know. Then she put her phone down, picked up her keys, and headed out the door. Liam was meeting her for dinner at a new restaurant they'd been wanting to try. The evening stretched out before her, full of unknown, ordinary potential. There were no battles left to fight, no fires to put out. There was only the quiet, steady hum of a life being lived on its own terms. The chair at Thanksgiving had been the catalyst, the final, undeniable symbol of her place in their world. But in leaving it, she had not just walked away from a table. She had walked towards everything. The story of the forgotten seat was over. And the story of Sarah was just beginning. She stepped out into the bustling city street, merging with the crowd, invisible and, for the first time, completely, utterly free.